Family, can I tell you something real? There are moments in life when the people we trusted the most end up cutting us the deepest. And if we're honest, some of us walked in here today still bleeding from wounds we never asked for. But I hear God saying, daughter, son, I saw it, I knew it, and I'm not going to let what they did be the end of your story. You didn't come here by accident. He's pulling you into a healing you didn't even know you were ready for. Because the truth is, God does not ignore the ones who hurt you. He doesn't sweep your pain under the rug or tell you to just get over it. No, he leans in. He steps into the middle of your chaos, into the middle of your heartbreak, and he says, watch me work. Not out of vengeance, but out of purpose. Out of a love so fierce that he refuses to let the actions of broken people break the masterpiece he created in you. So if you've been wondering how God handles the ones who mishandled you, stay right here. Because God is about to show you that what felt like betrayal was actually divine redirection. What felt like loss was the setup for a recovery that only heaven could orchestrate. And by the time God is done, you won't just be healed. You'll be wiser, stronger, and standing in a place those wounds were never powerful enough to keep you from. When we talk about betrayal, most people think of the moment everything fell apart. The conversation that cut too deep, the relationship that shattered without warning, the trust that evaporated in front of your eyes. But the truth is, betrayal isn't just an event. It's an earthquake. It shakes the foundation of who you thought you were, what you thought you had, and where you believed you were going. And in the middle of that shaking, it often feels like nothing good could ever come from something that painful. But this is where God steps in, because betrayal is one of the rawest materials he uses to build breakthrough. It doesn't feel holy. It doesn't feel divine. It doesn't feel like purpose, but it becomes all those things when God places his hands on it. Betrayal hurts in a way that feels unfair because it usually comes from people we never expected to hurt us. Strangers can wound your feelings, but only people with access to your heart can wound your soul. And when someone abuses that access, when they mishandle the parts of you they promised to protect, you're left holding pieces you don't know how to put back together. You replay conversations, you question your worth, you second guess your discernment, and you wonder why God didn't warn you sooner. But sometimes God doesn't stop the betrayal because he knows the breaking must happen for you to become who he designed you to be. He doesn't author the betrayal, but he absolutely uses it. What the enemy meant to fracture you becomes the exact thing God uses to free you. There are seasons where betrayal is the only language strong enough to push you out of what was comfortable but toxic, because if you had stayed comfortable, you would have remained in a place that could not hold the weight of the next level God was calling you into. Sometimes we cling to people, places, and versions of ourselves long after God has tried to get our attention. So when the betrayal comes, it doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to release you. God allows the shaking because he knows you wouldn't step out of that situation unless something forced you out of it. And even though it feels like rejection, in heaven it registers as redirection. When betrayal hits, it exposes what was weak, what was fragile, and what was never meant to be attached to your future. The truth is, not everyone who walked with you was meant to go forward with you. Some people were meant for the chapter, but not the book. Some relationships were meant to teach you, but not keep you. You can love someone deeply and still not be aligned with them spiritually. And when misalignment continues long enough, God allows the weight of that misalignment to make itself known. Betrayal becomes the revealer. It separates what is no longer serving your spirit from what is essential for your purpose. It gives you clarity you didn't even know you needed, because sometimes you can't see the truth until it hurts. What many don't realize is that breakthrough often begins with the breaking, and while the breaking is painful, the breakthrough is powerful. When the betrayal tears something apart, God starts building something new, but he built it on a foundation that cannot be shaken. Suddenly, the things that used to distract you no longer have power. The people who used to influence you no longer have access. The insecurities that used to speak louder than God's promises start losing their voice. Betrayal empties your hands of what was never meant to stay, so God can fill them with what was always meant to be yours. It clears the space for the upgrade God has been preparing for you. Think about the moments in Scripture where betrayal became the very catalyst for elevation. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and still God used that betrayal to position him in a place of authority he could have never reached on his own. The betrayal wasn't the end, it was the transportation. David was betrayed by Saul, hunted without cause, and yet that betrayal pushed him into the training ground that developed him into a king. Even Jesus was betrayed by Judas, and that betrayal opened the door to the greatest victory heaven has ever released. If God used their betrayal for breakthrough, what makes you think he won't do the same with yours? The reason betrayal hurts so deeply is because it attacks your identity. It makes you question if you are worthy of loyalty, love, or honesty. It whispers lies that say you are not enough or too much or somehow deserving of the pain. But God never lets betrayal be the final word. When God steps into the situation, he begins rewriting the narrative around your identity. He reminds you that you are chosen, not forsaken, that you are loved, not abandoned, that you are valuable, not disposable. He begins to separate your worth from the actions of people who were never healthy enough to value you properly in the first place. This is where transformation begins, not when the betrayal happens, but when God steps into the space the betrayal created. The wound becomes the doorway for his healing. The disappointment becomes the soil where resilience is planted. The loss becomes the opening for divine substitution. God does not waste pain. Every tear you cried becomes a seed, and God knows how to water those seeds until they grow into wisdom, strength, confidence, and spiritual maturity. You begin to recognize that the betrayal didn't break you, it built you. It built your prayer life. It built your discernment. It built your boundaries. It built your capacity to stand in places you used to shrink in. It taught you to hear God's voice above all others. As you heal, you start looking back and realizing that the betrayal exposed things you never would have seen otherwise. It showed you who was with you for real and who was only with you for what they could get. It revealed the difference between seasonal people and covenant people. It taught you that peace is more valuable than proximity and that loyalty is more spiritual than emotional. God uses betrayal to refine your relationships, not to make you bitter, but to make you wise. Betrayal becomes the filter through which God removes what cannot sustain your destiny. But healing doesn't happen overnight. Betrayal creates wounds that require time, honesty, and God's presence. And in that healing process, God begins to develop a version of you that is stronger than the version that existed before the betrayal. He strengthens your voice. He sharpens your intuition. He widens your vision. He deepens your dependence on him. Breakthrough doesn't always look like celebration. Sometimes breakthrough looks like survival that turns into revival. It looks like waking up one day and realizing the pain no longer controls you. It looks like being able to talk about the betrayal without crying. It looks like no longer seeking closure from people who were never capable of giving it. It looks like stepping into a future that betrayal was never strong enough to block. What God transforms in you through betrayal becomes a weapon the enemy can no longer use against you. The same pain that tried to destroy you becomes the testimony that carries others. The same deception that tried to silence you becomes the message you preach with authority. The same heartbreak that tried to weaken you becomes the strength that makes hell nervous. God takes betrayal and forges something unshakable inside of you. identity, purpose, resilience, and wisdom. You come out of betrayal with a deeper understanding of who God is and who you are in Him. The people who hurt you lose their power. The pain loses its hold. The betrayal loses its sting. And somewhere in that process, you begin to realize the most unexpected truth. The betrayal didn't stop your destiny. It initiated it. The betrayal didn't delay your breakthrough. It delivered it. God never allows betrayal without purpose. He never lets pain touch your life unless He intends to pull glory out of it. He never lets people walk away unless their absence is required for where He is taking you next. Betrayal becomes the tool He uses to shift you from where you were into where you were always meant to be. When we talk about the justice of God, many people immediately imagine lightning bolts, punishment, or a dramatic display of power, but God's justice doesn't look like human revenge. He's not reactionary. He's not impulsive. He doesn't operate out of wounded pride or broken ego. His justice is rooted in His character, and His character is love, protection, order, and purpose. When God deals with those who hurt you, He's not trying to get them back. He's trying to protect what He placed in you, reposition you for what's ahead, and restore what was threatened, stolen, or damaged. Revenge is emotional, but justice is divine. And when God moves in justice, He moves with wisdom that sees far beyond the moment of pain you experience. Human revenge aims to hurt the person who hurt you, but it rarely heals the part of you that was wounded. Even if you had the power to retaliate, it wouldn't fix the deep place in your heart that betrayal, disrespect, or mistreatment fractured. It might give momentary satisfaction, but it can't produce long-term healing. That's why God does not hand you the weapon of revenge. He hands you the promise of justice. Justice says, I will handle it in a way that protects your future, not just your feelings. Justice says, I will deal with what they did, but I will also deal with what it did to you. Justice is not only about the offender, it is also about the restoration of the one who was hurt. God is always thinking bigger than the moment. He's thinking about the ripple effect, the transformation, and the positioning that leads you into your destiny. When God begins to bring justice into your story, He doesn't start with punishment. He starts with protection. There are things you don't see when you're hurting. You see the betrayal, but God sees the spiritual threat behind it. You see the rejection, but God sees the direction it forced you toward. You see the loss, but God sees the room it created. Protection isn't always God stopping people from hurting you. Sometimes protection is God removing you from places where the hurt would have kept growing. Sometimes protection looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like blocked access. Sometimes it looks like silence. God will cut off connections you were too loyal to walk away from because He knows keeping those connections would have meant losing yourself. Protection also comes in the form of revelation. God exposes motives, reveals truth, and uncovers hidden intentions, not to shame people, but to safeguard your purpose. God is not in the business of embarrassing those who hurt you. He is in the business of enlightening you so you don't fall into the same spiritual traps again. Sometimes God reveals someone's true colors by allowing them to mistreat you. That revelation is not punishment, it's rescue. It's God showing you who cannot be trusted with your next season. It's God showing you who is connected to your presence, but not committed to your well-being. When God protects you, He protects your heart, your mind, your energy, your assignment, and your future. After protection, God moves into positioning. This is where His justice becomes clear. God does not simply fix what was broken. He uses the breaking to place you exactly where you need to be for the next level of your calling. What someone meant to tear you down becomes the very thing God uses to lift you up. What someone tried to sabotage becomes the stage God uses to elevate you. Positioning is strategic. It's intentional. It's a divine rearrangement of your life to align you with opportunities, relationships, resources, and environments that were always meant for you but could not come to you until the wrong people were removed. Positioning is God saying what they tried to block, I'm going to use as a step forward. It's God turning stumbling blocks into stepping stones. But positioning doesn't always feel good while it's happening. It often feels like loss, isolation, confusion, or being pushed into territory you weren't emotionally ready to enter. Sometimes God will allow you to be moved by force because comfort would have kept you stagnant. The pain that pushed you out of one place becomes the very thing that ushers you into another. And when you look back, you realize the attack didn't derail you, it delivered you. How can we find abundance was actually transportation. What felt like betrayal was actually transformation. God positions you not based on where you were, but based on where he's taken you. That's why his justice is always more effective than human revenge. Revenge keeps you tied to the moment, but positioning elevates you into your destiny. After God protects you and positions you, he brings restoration. Restoration is more than healing. It is the return, renewal, or replacement of what was damaged or stolen, often at a greater level than before. When God restores, he does not return you to who you were before the pain. He restores you into someone wiser, stronger, more confident, more discerning, and more aligned with his purpose. Restoration is God rebuilding your heart, your trust, your confidence, and your sense of identity. It's God giving you joy in places that once held sorrow. It's God returning peace to places that were once filled with anxiety. Restoration is God telling you, you will not walk forever with the limp someone else caused. Restoration also happens in your opportunities. What you lost relationally, emotionally, or spiritually, God has a way of replacing with something healthier, greater, and more aligned. You may have lost a friendship, but God gives you community. You may have lost support, but God gives you clarity. You may have lost stability, but God gives you new foundations. You may have lost confidence, but God gives you identity rooted in him. Restoration doesn't erase the past. It redeems it. It takes what was supposed to destroy you and turns it into something that develops you. It allows you to look at old pain with new eyes and see that nothing was wasted. The beauty of God's justice is that it doesn't require you to participate in revenge, bitterness, or resentment. You don't have to plot, prove, or perform. You don't have to carry the weight of trying to show someone they were wrong for mistreating you. You don't have to convince anyone of your worth or beg anyone to see your value. When God brings justice, he clears your name without you having to clap back. He set things in order without you having to defend yourself. He exposes truth without you having to retaliate. His justice frees you from the burden of trying to fix what people broke on purpose or in ignorance. This kind of justice creates peace. Not the peace that comes from everything going your way, but the peace that comes from knowing God is handling things you cannot see, cannot control, and cannot carry. It is peace rooted in trust. Trust. That God saw the conversations you weren't in, the intentions you couldn't discern, and the manipulation you didn't recognize. Trust that God is fair, faithful, and intentional. Trust that God is not just punishing wrong, but protecting right. Trust that nothing someone did to you can stop what God is doing in you. And as God's justice unfolds, you begin to realize something deeper. The people who hurt you weren't your enemy. They were your assignment's catalyst. Their actions pushed you toward growth you didn't know you needed. Their betrayal exposed the cracks you didn't know you had. Their mistreatment revealed the strength you didn't know you carried. And God's justice took what they meant for harm and turned it into wisdom, elevation, clarity, purpose, and power. God's justice always gives you more than what you lost. It gives you insight, maturity, discernment, and spiritual authority. It builds a version of you that is unshakable. God's justice positions you where revenge never could.